My parents promised my sister that she could move into my $515,000 Lakehouse without even asking me first. And when I told them no, they called me cruel. What they didn't realize was that their own entitlement would be the very thing that brought them down. Before we dive into this story, make sure you're subscribed and have notifications turned on so you never miss a tale of justice. And I'd love to know, where in the world are you listening from today? Let me know in the comments. Okay, let's get into it. I'll never forget the exact moment this whole mess began, because it came wrapped in the kind of cheerful phone call you'd expect from parents announcing good news. My mom's voice was bright, almost sing-song, as if she were telling me about a surprise vacation or a family reunion. But the words she spoke felt like a stone dropping into the pit of my stomach. She said, "We told your sister and her fiancé that they can move into your lake house. Isn't that wonderful?" They're so excited. For a second, I thought I had misheard her. I remember pressing the phone tighter against my ear, my gaze drifting out the wide windows of my living room that overlooked the calm, glassy water of the lake. The house I had poured years of hard work, long nights, and sacrifice into stood proudly against the shoreline, a symbol of independence, stability, and finally, peace. And now, in one careless breath, my parents had decided it was no longer mine to enjoy. At first, I laughed. It was a reflex, the kind of disbelieving laugh that slips out when you think someone must be joking. "Wait, what do you mean you told them they could move in?" I asked, trying to keep my tone light even though a thin thread of dread was already coiling in my chest. Mom didn't waver. She said it as if it were the most natural thing in the world. "Oh, honey, your sister and her fiancé need a fresh start. And you've got all that space sitting there. You don't even use half of it. It'll be good for everyone." That was the moment the first crack opened in what had been, until then, a somewhat fragile but tolerable family dynamic. I was silent for a beat too long, and Mom filled the space with her usual brand of justification. "Family helps family. You've been so blessed. It's only fair you share." But beneath her words, all I heard was a loud, unspoken truth. They hadn't asked. They hadn't even considered asking. They had made a decision about my property, my sanctuary, as if it were theirs to give away. A cold ripple of anger ran through me, but I tried to steady myself. I've always been someone who thinks carefully before I speak, someone who avoids rash reactions. Yet that day, my patience felt like it was already running on fumes. I said, slowly and clearly, "Mom, that house is mine. You can't just promise it to someone else. I never agreed to this." There was a pause. Then, in the background, I heard my dad's voice chiming in calm, firm, the voice of someone who believed his authority was still unquestioned, even though I was long past the age where he could dictate my life. "Don't be difficult," he said. "Your sister's counting on this. Don't ruin it for her." And just like that, my role in their narrative was cast. I was the difficult one, the obstacle, the selfish sister who was threatening to spoil a gift that was never theirs to give. I remember looking around my lake house, then the warm wood beams overhead, the photographs of sunsets I had taken from the dock, the careful renovations I had saved for years to complete. Every corner of that home held a piece of me, a story of struggle and triumph, and they were treating it like a spare room in the family home, something to be handed off to the child who had never built anything for herself. The knot in my stomach tightened. I knew in that instant that this wasn't going to be a simple misunderstanding we could laugh off later. This was the opening shot in a battle I hadn't asked for but couldn't ignore. I told them, firmly, "No, she's not moving in. My mom's cheerful tone cracked immediately. Why are you being so cruel? She needs this, and you've got more than enough. Do you want her to fail? The word cruel stuck in my ears like a splinter. Cruel. As if protecting the one thing I had worked my entire adult life to earn made me heartless. As if saying no to their overreach was a betrayal, instead of the other way around. I could feel my heartbeat in my throat as I ended the call, her disappointed voice still echoing in my mind. I stood in the quiet of my lake house, the still water outside reflecting the soft orange of the setting sun. It should have been a moment of peace, of gratitude. Instead, it was the moment I realized my sanctuary was under siege not from strangers, but from the very people who were supposed to protect and respect me most. And in that silence, I made a quiet promise to myself. I wasn't going to let them take this from me. Not now, not ever. After I hung up the phone, I stood there for a long time, trying to steady my breathing. The house was quiet to quiet. Usually, the silence here felt like a blessing. A soothing contrast to the constant hum of the city and the weight of my workday life. But in that moment, the stillness pressed down on me, filled with the echo of my mother's voice calling me cruel. It forced me to think back not just to the phone call, but to the years that had led me here. Because as shocking as their demand had been, in truth, it wasn't entirely out of character. Let me explain the cast of players in this story. First, there's me. I'm in my mid-30s now, but it took me the better part of 15 years to get here to this lake house, to this sense of stability, to the life I finally feel I've built with my own two hands. My 20s were spent grinding. I worked long hours, balancing more than one job at times. I sacrificed vacations, fancy dinners, and even some friendships, all to save enough for this dream. This house wasn't just a piece of property, it was proof of everything I had endured and overcome. The lake house was my sanctuary. It was where I could breathe without judgment, where the water outside seemed to wash away the chaos of the world, where every room told me, you did this, you earned this. Then, there are my parents. To anyone on the outside, they would seem like a typical, loving couple, helpful, social, always ready with advice. But beneath that surface, they've always carried a streak of entitlement when it came to me. To them, my success was never fully my own. It was the family's success. My achievements weren't viewed as personal milestones, but resources for everyone else to tap into. They weren't malicious, exactly. It wasn't as though they set out to hurt me, but they had a way of minimizing my boundaries, of treating my life as an extension of theirs. Whenever there was a problem, be it a broken car, a missed bill, or even a failed relationship, it was always assumed that I would step in, pick up the slack, and keep things afloat. And then, of course, there was my sister. The golden child, the one who, despite being younger, was always treated as if the world owed her something. If I was the workhorse of the family, she was the butterfly. She drifted from one idea to the next, one relationship to another, never quite landing, never quite taking responsibility. Growing up, the contrast between us was stark. I was the one who studied late into the night, who worked part-time jobs through college, who learned to budget carefully. My sister was the one who borrowed money and forgot to pay it back, who had grand plans but never followed through, who seemed to expect that someone, usually me, would cushion her from the consequences. And my parents? They enabled it. Every single time. I remember one summer in particular, long before the lake house was even a dream on the horizon. My sister had wrecked her car, a beat-up old sedan my parents had bought her. She had been careless, driving too fast down a rainy road. Instead of making her take responsibility, My parents turned to me. Could you help her with a down payment for a new one? They asked, as if it were the most natural request in the world. Back then, I was too soft-spoken, too eager to keep the peace. I did it, even though I was barely scraping by myself. I still remember writing the check, feeling a hollow ache in my stomach, knowing she would never truly appreciate it. That was the pattern. Time and again, I was expected to sacrifice while she was shielded. My parents would praise me for being responsible, but that praise always came with strings attached. Being the responsible one meant I could never say no. So when my mother's voice rang in my ear that day, telling me they had promised my lake house to my sister, I shouldn't have been surprised. Deep down, I knew this was the inevitable climax of a long history of boundary crossing. The difference was, I wasn't the same person I had been all those years ago. I wasn't the girl writing checks for someone else's mistakes. I wasn't the one swallowing my frustration to keep the peace. I was a woman who had fought for her independence, who had carved out a life brick by brick, paycheck by paycheck, who had finally claimed something for herself. And I wasn't about to let them strip it away in the name of family. Still, that didn't stop the sting of betrayal. As I stood in my living room that evening, watching the sun dip lower across the water, I couldn't shake the sense of déjà vu. It was the same story, playing out once again, my sister being handed what she hadn't earned, and me being cast as selfish for protecting what I had built. Only this time, the stakes were higher. This wasn't a car payment or a rent check. This was my home, my safe place, my dream, and though they didn't know it yet, this was the moment everything began to change. Asterisk. The phone call had left me shaken, but I tried to convince myself that maybe, just maybe, things would calm down if I stood my ground. I thought, perhaps, once I made it clear the lake house wasn't up for discussion, my parents would back off. But that was wishful thinking. A few days later, I got another call. This time, both my parents were on speakerphone, and the tone was different, less cheerful, more determined. Almost like they were presenting me with a done deal. My dad started. His voice was steady, clipped. The kind of voice he used when he wanted to close a conversation before it even began. We've told your sister and her fiancé that they'll be moving into the lake house by the end of the month. They're already making plans. I felt my chest tighten. You what? Mom jumped in, her voice syrupy, as if sugarcoating the words would make them go down easier. Oh, don't sound so shocked. You know they've been struggling. This is a good solution for everyone. You've got space. They need a home. It's perfect. I gripped the edge of my kitchen counter, grounding myself. My mind spun with disbelief. It wasn't just that they had suggested the idea, it was that they had announced it as fact. They had crossed from making assumptions into making promises. Promises they had no right to make. Perfect for who? I asked quietly, my voice trembling, though not with fear, with anger I was trying hard to contain. There was a pause on the line. Then, as if rehearsed, Mom said, for the family. Don't be difficult. There it was again. Difficult. The word they always used when I dared to resist. But this time, it landed differently. It wasn't just patronizing, it was threatening. As if my refusal to comply wasn't an option at all. I remember staring out at the water then, its surface ruffled by the late afternoon breeze. The lake had always calmed me, but that day it only mirrored the storm inside me. I thought about all the years I had worked, about the overtime hours, the missed holidays, the quiet nights spent with nothing but my budget spreadsheets. Every sacrifice had been leading to this place, this home that stood as proof of my effort. And now my parents were treating it like some community asset. like a family heirloom that my sister was entitled to enjoy. The worst part was, I could hear the assumption in their voices that I would fold, that I would do what I had always done, swallow my pride, sacrifice my comfort, and hand over what they wanted for the sake of keeping the peace. But something inside me shifted in that moment. I realized, with a cold clarity, that this wasn't just about my sister needing a place to stay. This was about control, about the unspoken belief that no matter how old I got, no matter what I achieved, my life would always be theirs to direct, my resources theirs to distribute. And I couldn't let that continue, so I said it again, firmer this time. No, she's not moving in. You had no right to promise her that. The silence that followed was heavy, broken only by the faint hum of static on the line. Then Mom snapped, her sweetness gone. You are being cruel. Do you want your sister to be homeless? Do you want her to fail? The word cruel cut through me like a blade. It wasn't just an accusation, it was a manipulation, and I felt it sink into my chest, heavy and cold, like a weight designed to break me down. But instead of shattering, something inside me hardened. I realized this was the line being crossed. This was no longer about favors or family obligations. This was about ownership, about boundaries, about respect. And they had trampled all over mine without a second thought. When I hung up the phone that night, I knew the battle had officially begun. My parents had made promises in my name, carved expectations out of my hard work, and painted me as the villain for daring to resist. And deep down, I knew they wouldn't stop until I stopped them. Asterisk in the days that followed, I kept hoping that maybe, just maybe, my parents would realize how unreasonable they were being. I thought that if I stayed firm, they would back off, apologize even, and admit they had overstepped. But instead, the opposite happened. The first sign came in the form of another phone call. This time, my mother's tone wasn't cheerful or disappointed, it was sharp, laced with irritation. She didn't waste time with pleasantries. You know, she said, your sister is devastated. She's been crying all week. She thought she finally had a stable place to live, and now you're taking it away from her. The words hit me like darts, carefully aimed to pierce through my defenses. I could practically hear the accusation behind them. You're selfish. You're heartless. You've ruined her happiness. I swallowed hard, keeping my voice level. I didn't take anything away. That house was never hers to begin with. But she didn't hear me. Or rather, she didn't want to. She kept talking over me, layering guilt on top of guilt. Family shares. That's how it's always been. You've been so blessed, and your sister has struggled. Why is it so hard for you to show a little generosity? That word generosity burned in my ears, as if protecting my own home wasn't basic survival, but some sort of cruelty. As if saying no was a character flaw. It didn't stop there. Within the week, I started getting messages from extended family members, an aunt, a cousin I hadn't spoken to in months. Each one carried the same undertone. Disappointment. I heard you're refusing to let your sister live with you. Is that true? Why would you do that to her? I could see my parents' fingerprints all over it. They had gone to the family grapevine, painting me as cold and selfish. The sister who turned her back when family needed her most. It was infuriating. And yet, it was also deeply familiar. This was exactly how my parents had always handled conflict, by framing me as the difficult one and rallying everyone else to their side. But this time, the stakes were higher. The gossip wasn't just tarnishing my image, it was eroding the peace of mind I had built here at the lake. And then came the final insult. One evening, as I scrolled through social media, my stomach dropped. My sister's fiancé had posted a picture of the lake, my lake, with the caption, "Excited for our fresh start in our new lake house. Big things ahead." He had tagged the location. He had shared my sanctuary with the world as if it already belonged to them. The comments poured in beneath the post. Friends congratulating them. Family members chiming in about how beautiful the place looked. People asking when the big move was happening. I sat there, phone in hand, my heart pounding. It was one thing for my parents to try to gild me in private, but this was public. My sister and her fiancé had staked their claim before the entire community, and by extension, they had painted me as nothing more than an obstacle standing in their way. The next morning, one of my neighbors stopped me as I was heading to the dock. He smiled warmly and said, "So when are your new tenants moving in? It'll be nice to have some young energy around here." I felt my face burn. Tenants, as if I were some absent landlord. And my sister and her fiancé had legitimate rights to the space. That was when something inside me snapped. The anger that had been simmering beneath the surface erupted into clarity. It wasn't just frustration anymore, it was a sharp, steady flame. They weren't just testing my patience. They were trying to rewrite reality itself, to act as if my no meant nothing. For years, I had given in to keep the peace. I had played the role of the responsible one, the giver, the fixer. But standing there on my dock, listening to my neighbor's casual congratulations, I realized something vital. If I didn't take control of this situation, I would lose more than my home. I would lose my voice, my boundaries, and my right to be respected. And I couldn't allow that. Not anymore. The pressure had been building for weeks, each day adding another layer to the weight pressing down on me. The phone calls, the guilt trips, the whispers from extended family, the smug social media posts, it all blurred into a storm that followed me everywhere. But the breaking point came one quiet Saturday morning. I had stepped out onto the deck with a cup of coffee, letting the cool breeze brush against my skin. The lake shimmered in the early light, that soft kind of silver-blue glow that always made me feel at peace. I needed that peace more than ever. But as I scrolled idly through my phone, my sense of calm shattered. There it was, another post from my sister's fiancé. This one wasn't just a picture of the lake. It was a photo of him and my sister standing by the water, right near my dock. They must have driven out without telling me, wandered onto my property as if it already belonged to them, and posed like kings of a castle they hadn't built. The caption read, "Can't wait to start our new chapter here. Our dream lake house is finally ours, double quotes ours." My stomach twisted into a hard knot. My hands trembled as I held the phone, my coffee cooling forgotten beside me. The arrogance of it, the entitlement. They hadn't even moved in, and already they were claiming ownership of something I had bled for. And it wasn't just them. The comments below piled on, a chorus of celebration. "So happy for you too. You deserve it. That house is gorgeous. You're so lucky." Lucky, as if luck had anything to do with it. That was the moment I realized this wasn't just an invasion of my home, it was an erasure of my story. They were rewriting the narrative, casting themselves as the rightful owners, and me as nothing more than a selfish obstacle. I felt anger rise in me, sharp and hot, but beneath it was something colder, steadier. Resolve. Because here's the thing, I had spent too many years playing the role they cast me in. The dependable one, the fixer, the quiet sister who gave and gave, who swallowed her anger, who kept the family peace no matter the cost to herself. But not anymore. The final straw came later that same day. I was out running errands when one of my neighbors waved me down in the grocery store. He smiled and said, We're looking forward to meeting your sister and her fiancé. Heard they'll be moving in soon. Congratulations to them." My chest tightened. It wasn't his fault, he was just repeating what he'd heard. But the humiliation burned all the same. My home, my sanctuary, had been claimed so thoroughly by their lies that the community believed them over me. I smiled politely, muttered something vague, but inside I was on fire. That was it. Enough was enough. Driving home, my mind raced. The road blurred around me as I gripped the wheel, replaying every moment: my parents' smug certainty, my sister's smug posts, the way they had all dismissed my no as irrelevant. That was when I understood. This wasn't a misunderstanding. It wasn't a simple family disagreement. It was a takeover, a hostile claim, and the only way to stop it was to fight back. And by the time I pulled into my driveway, the decision was made. I would no longer beg, explain, or justify myself. They had crossed too many lines, and it was time I drew one of my own. But I also knew this battle couldn't be won with anger alone. If I lashed out without a plan, they'd twist it, paint me as hysterical or bitter. No, if I wanted to win, I needed to be clever, precise, strategic. I set my coffee down, walked straight to my desk, and pulled out the thick folder where I kept all my paperwork: mortgage agreements, property deeds, renovation permits. Every document that proved what I already knew in my bones: this house was mine. And in that moment, as I spread those papers across my desk, a calm settled over me. For the first time in weeks, I felt in control again, because I wasn't just going to tell them no. I was going to show them, in front of everyone, that their lies had no power here. They had humiliated me publicly, and so, publicly, I would take my power back. The battle lines were drawn. I sat at my desk late into that night, surrounded by neat stacks of paper, the soft glow of the desk lamp casting long shadows across the room. Mortgage statements, closing documents, tax receipts, renovation permits, every scrap of proof that this house was mine, and mine alone, was laid out before me like armor. For years, I had kept these papers tucked away in a safe folder, barely glancing at them except during tax season. But now, as I sifted through them one by one, they became something more. They were no longer just records, they were my shield, my weapon, because here was the undeniable truth, written in ink and notarized. My name was the only one on every page. No co-owners, no hidden clauses, no wiggle room. This lake house was mine, legally and unequivocally. The realization steadied me. My parents and my sister could spin whatever story they wanted to relatives, neighbors, or social media, but in the end, facts would speak louder than their lies. Still, the question remained: how could I use those facts effectively? I leaned back in my chair, closing my eyes for a moment. My mind wandered to the past weeks of humiliation: the Facebook post, the whispered gossip, the neighbor congratulating me in the grocery store. They had dragged this battle into the public eye, parading their entitlement for everyone to see. That was when it clicked. If they wanted to fight this battle publicly, then I would finish it publicly. I thought back to all the family barbecues and gatherings we'd had over the years. My parents thrived in front of an audience. They loved being seen as generous, as the ones helping their children succeed. They had used that same stage to humiliate me, casting me as the selfish one. But what if I turned the tables? What if I brought everyone together, not to celebrate their false promises, but to witness the truth for themselves? The idea began to crystallize in my mind. I could host a small get-together at the lake house. Nothing flashy, just a casual gathering of family and close neighbors. My parents and sister would assume it was a peace offering, maybe even a welcome party for her supposed move-in. They'd arrive smug, certain of their victory, and then, in front of everyone, I would present the truth. Not angrily, not with shouting or drama, calmly, factually, with the kind of composure that couldn't be twisted into cruelty. I would show the deed, explain clearly that the house was mine, and make it undeniable that no one else had any claim to it. The thought alone filled me with a strange, quiet satisfaction. For weeks, I had felt cornered, silenced, painted as the villain. But now, I could already imagine the look on their faces when the reality hit them. The shock, the outrage, the sudden realization that their entire charade was about to collapse under the weight of cold, hard truth. I gathered the most important documents into a single envelope: the deed, the mortgage statement, and proof of my most recent property tax payments. I slid them inside carefully, the way one might sheath a blade, and as I tucked the envelope into my desk drawer, a calm, resolute thought settled in my chest. They thought they could take my home with guilt and lies, but I was going to take it back with facts and strategy. For the first time in weeks, I went to bed without that knot of dread in my stomach. I knew what needed to be done, and I knew exactly how I was going to do it. The next phase of this battle was mine to command. The plan unfolded more smoothly than I could have hoped. I decided to host the gathering on a Sunday afternoon, under the guise of a simple family get-together. Nothing unusual, just food, drinks, and a chance to catch up. I knew my parents well enough to predict their reaction. The moment they heard about it, they would assume it was a peace offering, a white flag. Sure enough, when I called to extend the invitation, my mother's tone shifted instantly from cold to sugary sweet. "Oh, honey, that's wonderful. Your sister will be thrilled. She thought you'd never come around." I bit back a smile, keeping my voice even. "Yes, I think it'll be good for everyone to clear the air." She had no idea. In the days leading up to the gathering, I prepared everything carefully. I laid out snacks, arranged seating on the deck overlooking the lake, and made sure the place looked welcoming. On the surface, it was just another casual afternoon by the water. But tucked neatly into a folder in my study were the documents that would end this battle once and for all. When Sunday arrived, the house buzzed with chatter and laughter. Relatives filtered in, carrying side dishes and bottles of wine. Neighbors strolled over, eager for a glimpse of the new chapter my sister and her fiancé had been bragging about. And then came my parents, beaming, holding hands, radiating the smug satisfaction of people who believed victory was already theirs. My sister followed close behind, her fiancé at her side, both of them grinning like royalty about to claim their throne. The sight of them striding across my deck, heads held high, sparked a flicker of anger in me. But I steadied myself. This wasn't the time for anger. This was the time for precision. As the afternoon wore on, I played the gracious host. I refilled drinks, smiled politely, let the conversations flow. My parents mingled proudly, introducing my lake house as though it were already my sister's. I overheard my mother telling a distant cousin, "She's finally agreed, it's such a blessing for the family." Each lie made my jaw tighten. But I stayed patient, because I knew the moment was coming. Finally, when the sun dipped lower in the sky, and the crowd had settled with plates of food, I stood up. My heart pounded, but my voice was steady. "Everyone," I said, raising my glass slightly, "thank you for coming today. I wanted to take a moment to address something that's been causing a lot of confusion." The deck quieted. My parents exchanged glances, perhaps assuming I was about to make some grand announcement about welcoming my sister. My sister leaned forward expectantly, her eyes gleaming. That was when I walked to the table where I'd placed the folder. Slowly, deliberately, I opened it and held up the first page, the official deed to the property. "This lake house," I said clearly, "is mine. It has always been mine. My name is the only one on this deed, the only one on the mortgage, the only one on the property taxes. No one else has ever had any claim to it." A ripple of silence swept through the crowd. I could feel dozens of eyes flicking between me and the documents in my hand. I laid the deed flat on the table, followed by the mortgage statement and the most recent tax receipt. Each page landed with a quiet but unmistakable weight. "I've heard a lot of rumors lately," I continued. "Rumors that my sister and her fiancé were moving in here, that this home had been promised to them. I want to be very clear that was never true. It was never discussed with me. It was never agreed upon. And it will never happen." The words hung in the air, sharp and undeniable. I glanced at my sister then. Her face had gone pale, her lips pressed into a thin, angry line. My parents shifted uncomfortably, their smiles frozen in place. The silence stretched until finally, someone from the crowd, a neighbor, spoke up. "Well," he said slowly, "that seems pretty clear." A few murmurs of agreement followed. Relatives leaned forward to glance at the papers, their expressions turning from confusion to dawning realization. And in that moment, I felt the tide shift. For weeks, I had been the villain in their story, the cruel, selfish sister withholding her blessings. But now, with the truth spread out for all to see, their narrative crumbled. I straightened, my pulse steady. For the first time in this entire ordeal, I wasn't defending myself. I wasn't just saying no. I was showing everyone the reality they couldn't deny. And it felt like reclaiming not just my house, but my voice. The silence that followed my words was heavy, almost suffocating. I could hear the faint lap of the lake against the dock, the distant cry of a bird across the water, tiny sounds that seemed magnified in the stillness of the crowd. For a long moment, no one moved. Everyone's eyes were on me, then on the documents spread out on the table, then back again, and then, as if the silence itself had pushed her over the edge, my sister exploded. "You've got to be kidding me," she shouted, her voice sharp and shrill, breaking the quiet like glass shattering on concrete. "You're seriously doing this? In front of everyone?" She stood so suddenly that her chair screeched against the deck. Her fiancé rose too, his face tight with embarrassment, though he tried to mask it with a smirk. My sister jabbed a finger toward me, her cheeks flushed with anger. "You're unbelievable," she spat. "Selfish. Jealous. You've always hated me, and now you're proving it. You can't stand to see me happy, so you're throwing this little show to humiliate me." I didn't flinch. I kept my voice calm, though inside my heart was pounding like a drum. "No," I said evenly. "The only people who've been dishonest here are you and Mom and Dad. You told everyone this house was yours before I had a chance to correct the lie. I'm simply setting the record straight." My parents shifted uncomfortably, their smiles long gone. My father cleared his throat, his tone stern but unconvincing. "Now, come on. There's no need to make a scene. This is family business. We don't need to drag everyone else into it." But it was too late for that. Everyone was already watching, already forming their own judgments. And for once, I wasn't the one on trial. A murmur ran through the group. I caught snippets of whispered words. Promised. Unbelievable. Entitled. My sister's eyes darted around the crowd, her anger faltering as she realized people weren't rushing to defend her. She tried again, her voice desperate now. You don't even need this place. You live here alone, rattling around with more space than you can use. It's wasted on you." The words hit me like icy water, but they didn't wound me the way she intended. Instead, they only sharpened the contrast between us. Because she wasn't talking about fairness. She was talking about entitlement, about what she thought she was owed. And the crowd saw it too. A neighbor shook his head, muttering, "It's not wasted if she worked for it." An aunt leaned toward another relative and whispered something that made them both frown disapprovingly at my sister. The tide had turned, and she knew it. My mother finally spoke, her voice tight, pleading, "Honey, please, don't do this. Your sister just needs a chance. You've always been so strong, so capable. Surely you can find it in your heart to help her this once." But I only shook my head. This isn't about helping. This is about taking. You crossed a line when you promised something that wasn't yours to give, and then you doubled down by spreading lies. I won't allow it anymore. My sister let out a strangled sound, half a laugh, half a sob. She grabbed her fiancé's arm and hissed, "We're leaving. This is pathetic." And just like that, she stormed off the deck, her fiancé trailing behind her. Her anger trailed with her like smoke, but it had nowhere left to land. My parents stood awkwardly, their faces pale, their authority stripped away in front of everyone. For the first time, they weren't the ones controlling the narrative. They had tried to paint me as cruel, but in that moment, the cruelty was theirs and everyone could see it. And the best part, I didn't have to shout. I didn't have to beg. All I had to do was show the truth and let it speak louder than their lies. As my sister stormed across the deck, her heels clattering against the wood, I felt a surge of adrenaline pulse through me. For weeks I had carried the weight of her entitlement, my parents' manipulation, the humiliation of being painted as the selfish one. And now, finally, I stood here with all of that crumbling around them, exposed under the bright light of truth. Her fiancé tried to tug her toward the car, mumbling something I couldn't catch, but she wrenched her arm free long enough to throw one last dagger my way. "You'll regret this," she screamed, her voice sharp and brittle. "You'll regret treating your family like dirt." The words hung in the air, jagged and empty, before dissolving into the quiet hum of the evening. I took a slow breath, turned toward her, and spoke with the calm I'd been cultivating all along. My voice wasn't raised. I didn't need to shout. Every person on that deck was leaning in to hear. "You don't get to live here," I said evenly. "You don't even get a spare key. This house is mine not because it was given to me, but because I worked for it, paid for it, and sacrificed for it. And you will never take that away from me." The silence that followed was electric. My sister's face twisted with fury, but there was nothing left for her to say. Not with the deed sitting on the table. Not with the neighbors shaking their heads. Not with relatives avoiding her gaze, ashamed of the spectacle. For the first time, the power was mine not because I fought harder, but because I fought smarter. She spun on her heel and stormed off toward the car, muttering curses under her breath. Her fiancé followed, his bravado gone, his shoulders hunched like a man who realized he'd backed the wrong horse. The slam of their car doors echoed across the lake, followed by the roar of the engine as they sped away. And just like that, the storm passed. The crowd on the deck slowly began to stir again, people exchanging uneasy glances. My aunt cleared her throat and said softly, "Well, that was something." A neighbor patted my arm, murmuring, "You did the right thing." One by one, the tension unraveled, replaced by quiet affirmations. Some relatives apologized for believing the lies. Others simply avoided my eyes, embarrassed for having doubted me. But none of that mattered anymore, because the truth was out, and it couldn't be undone. I stood there on my deck, the evening breeze carrying away the last of the shouting, and I felt lighter than I had in weeks. Not just because I had protected my home, but because I had finally broken the pattern, the endless cycle of giving, sacrificing, and swallowing my anger for the sake of peace. For the first time, I had stood firm, and for the first time, they had been forced to face the consequences of their entitlement. It wasn't loud, it wasn't flashy, but it was justice, and it was mine. Asterisk. The deck slowly emptied after my sister's dramatic exit. Guests excused themselves one by one, murmuring polite goodbyes, some avoiding eye contact altogether. A few lingered long enough to offer me quiet words of support. "You did what you had to do," one neighbor said, pressing my hand with a firm squeeze. "I can't believe they thought they could just take it," another whispered, shaking her head in disbelief. Their sympathy was a balm on the raw edges of my nerves, but I still felt drained. By the time the last guest left, the lake house was silent again. Silent the way I loved it, not heavy with dread, not echoing with accusations, just peaceful. I sank into a chair on the deck and watched the sun sink low over the water, the horizon painted in streaks of orange and lavender. For the first time in weeks, I didn't feel trapped. I didn't feel cornered. I felt free, but freedom came with a shift. Because even though the confrontation was over, the consequences lingered. My parents didn't call me for weeks after that gathering. When they finally did, their tone was subdued, almost embarrassed. My mother tried to gloss over the incident, acting as if it had been a simple misunderstanding. But the edge of her voice betrayed her. She knew what they'd done. They both did. I didn't let her sweep it under the rug. I told her calmly but firmly that things had to change, that I wouldn't be their safety net anymore, and that my boundaries were no longer negotiable. She didn't argue, and that silence told me more than any apology could. As for my sister, she didn't speak to me at all. Not directly, anyway, but I still heard from others that she was ranting online, spinning the story to her followers. According to her, I had humiliated her in front of family, robbed her of her dream home, and proved how heartless I really was. But her audience was smaller now. People who had been there that day, who had seen her tantrum with their own eyes, weren't buying her version of events anymore. The truth had a way of sticking, and that was enough for me. Life at the lake house returned to its rhythm. I woke up to the sound of birdsong, brewed my morning coffee, and sat on the deck without the weight of dread in my chest. I worked in my garden, took long walks along the shoreline, and let the calm water remind me of what I had fought so hard to preserve. This home wasn't just wood and stone, it was a reflection of my independence. And now, more than ever, it was proof that I could stand my ground when it mattered most. I learned something important through all of this. For years, I thought keeping the peace meant giving in, sacrificing myself so others wouldn't feel deprived. I thought boundaries were selfish, that saying no was cruel. But I see it differently now. Setting boundaries isn't cruel. What's cruel is expecting someone else to erase themselves for your comfort. What's cruel is taking without asking, demanding without gratitude, assuming without respect. I had been accused of cruelty when I said no, but in the end, the real cruelty was entitlement. And the justice? That came when I refused to play their game any longer, when I stood tall, armed with nothing more than the truth, and reclaimed what was always mine. Now, whenever I look out over the lake in the quiet of the evening, I don't just see water and sky. I see peace hard won, boundaries honored, and a new chapter of my life, one where I no longer mistake silence for strength. I am stronger now because I spoke, and I'll never let anyone take that from me again. Asterisk. Don't forget to subscribe and feel free to share your story in the comments. Your voice matters. Asterisk.